Okay.
Okay. Hi, Andrew and Tom, and thank you for doing the interview. So Tom told me you're not a psychologist, and Andrew, you are a psychologist. Is that correct? Yeah. And you both. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't catch that one, Nicola.
I was just checking if you are a psychologist because I was talking to Tom before and he told me he's not. I was thinking that, yeah. But you two work together and you both have experience in managing innovation and transition in organizations. And you also work with individuals, with leaders, yeah. So just to understand a little bit what you do, can you each tell me what kind of a problem you're actually, like what's the core problem that you're trying to solve in your career or your current work? Andrew, you can start first.
Okay, so a bit of context. My role is director at Envisia Learning. Envisia Learning works with clients to help develop products, mainly in assessment, learning and development. But I have strayed into some other areas which we might come on to talk about. And I guess my challenge is how do you get the balance right in innovation? There's a spectrum of high risk versus low risk. Low risk is probably a Me Too product that isn't going to add much value or generate much revenue. High risk, obviously there's a chance of a spectacular failure in the marketplace. So my role is really to help juggle the arts and craft actually of innovation to get that balance right between risk and rewards. And related to that challenge is how to accelerate the process. I think over the years I've been involved in probably 100+ product development applications. Some go very quickly and very efficiently, and some go very slowly and round in circles, and we never actually come to a resolution. So I'm always interested in what are the barriers to innovation and how can we overcome those barriers so we end up with a successful product that's been developed quickly and efficiently. So that's really where my space is.
Cool. And can I just ask you, what kind of products do you focus on?
Okay, a mix. Anything from online learning platforms through to assessment products, career development products, products that support 360 feedback, products around surveys. We've developed online interview toolkits, largely in the talent management space. So anything to do with people, from initial recruitment through to board level succession, we're interested in how can you use online technology and innovation to improve that experience and optimize the impact of that particular process.
Okay. Okay. So you're trying to maximize the human potential in organizations using the software tools.
Yeah, and there's 3 levels to that, Nicola. There's products that are for the individual, for their own development, career progression. There's products for teams, and how do you enhance the productivity and innovation of our teams? And then at an organizational level, what organization development interventions and applications can help the organization build culture, rethink strategy, and Tom probably spends a bit more time in that space than I do in terms of the combination of top teams, strategy and culture.
Okay, cool. So Tom, what kind of a problem do you focus on? What's your...
So my work, so I'm one of the founding directors of a small company called Ranmore, and our work is, as we say, enhancing the performance of knowledge-based organizations. In the early days, that was significantly focused on professional service organizations, so firms of specialists in any discipline you can imagine, from legal to surveying was my background, property advisory practices and so on. But these days I spend, probably for the last 15 years, I've concentrated significantly in working with leaders in higher education, particularly those close to the top, if not at the top levels in universities. And as Andrew's was alluding to, again, taking, in a sense, some of the products and ways of the toolkits which Andrew works on, working at the individual level, working at the team level, and then working at the organizational level to think about how to foster innovation. I sometimes describe the challenge of, imagine you or any of us were arriving in a city by train in the days when we could do so, and you were interested in innovation, and you stopped somebody and you'd not been there before, and you asked them two questions. The first question is, where would I find the most innovative, creative folks around this place? And if you were lucky, they might point you towards the local university and say, well, actually, you'll find some really bright people up there you might want to talk to. And that would take you in one direction. If your supplementary question was, where would I find the most creative organizations around here? You might be sent to the local university, but I'm not so sure. I think you may not find yourself being sent to the local university. So there's something I'm intrigued by, which is, what is it that happens when you put a load of very creative individuals together who can solve problems of the current nature? But when we put them all together into an organization, we may not get the maximum value from that collectively. So I'm interested in, if you like, collective, as one of the articles I was reading recently, Collective Genius, it was called, by Linda Hill at Harvard, I thought was a very interesting read, but also how you create conditions for more deliberate innovation at an organizational level. Yeah. That's often one of the challenges leaders at the top face. How do I change the culture to foster innovation?
It is a big paradox there, Tom, because I've encountered it in working with a few universities as well, yeah, which is that their innovation is outward facing, i.e. they've got very clever people doing all sorts of innovative research, you know, life sciences, technology, what have you, doing really interesting things that help organizations in the marketplace, but that innovation never gets directed internally.
I agree. And it's
why is that? You'd have thought if you've got a kind of a professor of innovation within a particular business school, within a particular university, why does that innovation not get applied in terms of how it operates, in terms of its structures, systems, processes? In fact, they're very conservative.
They are often, and it's the paradox, or it's the balancing act, going back to your point earlier, between, I think, on the one hand, a risk-taking culture which allows you to really force the boundaries and really challenge yourself, versus a regulatory compliance culture which demands that you meet the obligations of your funders, your stakeholders, your professional bodies, and how you get the both. And we need those checks and balances, but sometimes the checks and balances can act against the culture that you're seeking to engender and create. And I think until relatively recently, a lot of those checks and balances limited the amount of innovation. It's a topic we might come on to, but I think in the current COVID context, I think some of the rules of engagement and rules by which we've operated are becoming quite significantly challenged constructively, and I think create the conditions where there are going to be and are already beginning to see the early signs of innovation, where we've actually had to release the boundaries and think much more radically about how we reimagine delivery of education, the way in which we operate in an organizational sense, and so on. But it is an intriguing paradox for universities, and I suspect for many commercial organizations, particularly in professional services as well, where you've got the regulatory bodies, you've got professional standards to meet, and yet at the same time you're trying to innovate.
So the incentives empower you to take risks in the marketplace, but the incentive systems discourage innovation internally. Is that what we're saying?
To some extent, and I think the roles and where we see innovation happening. So if I take a university context, I would say that a significant role in a university is the role of what we often refer to as the dean. So it's the interface often between the head of a discipline, head of a department, an area, and they become the senior leader representing that, but also being part often of the senior leadership team. And the incentive systems are very significantly towards ensuring business is getting delivered, that students are being taught, that research is being delivered. And so a significant part of the role of a dean is to ensure continuity of service, continuity of outcomes, and so on. Actually, often the centers of innovation don't exist in those formal managerial leadership roles, but may well exist within small startup units, groups which come together in a much more organic way. And I think, again, there's some interesting vehicles by which that's, there's a very interesting book called New Power, a couple of US folks referring to the old power values, new power values. They were making a big thing about, and I agree with them, about the shifting balance towards the sort of social enterprise and social capital, and enabling more organic change to arise in organizational ways. And last point, I think, Andrew, you referred to the external facing. Sometimes the most innovative, creative organizational interventions are happening perhaps in the locality within which the university is based. So it's having a major impact in a civic sense of growing a place, the development of the civic culture, if you like, of the organization. But that often doesn't translate so easily internally as well.
Yeah. If I can ask, I'm listening to, I like what you're saying and I like the question, but I have this idea in my head that innovators need to fight. So if they really want to innovate, maybe they need to fight first within the organization where they're starting. My job is often like that, where I come to an organization, they have a company, I consult mostly small, medium, sometimes bigger companies, and they have their own ways. And leaders that hire me, they expect me to fight. They don't like, it's kind of an attitude where you're either a fighter, you're going to break through and succeed, or you just stay inside the organization. So my question to you both is how much is innovation related to fighting? Because in some previous interviews, some of the people that I spoke to, they relate innovation to competition. They see it as a together thing, meaning that it's, and innovators, I mean, one thing is being creative and inventive. Another thing is innovating, meaning you have to really fight and get things done. You have to really create the change. And I somehow see that innovation is necessary in a conservative, because someone needs to, punch through that and go further. So how much do you see this? Is it necessary to fight, or are we really pushing these people into fighting and wasting energy? It could be done without fighting, just pure rational, holding hands, getting things done together. And what's your opinion? But Andrew first.
It's a brilliant question. And a while back, we did a piece of research that looked at those leaders who are particularly original, creative, insightful, i.e. who potentially would drive innovation through the organization. And we then looked at the psychology of these individuals, and emotionally and interpersonally, they weren't the type who would fight. So we've got an irony. Sorry?
That would fight or not fight?
No.
They would fight or not fight?
Not fight.
They would not fight.
Emotionally and interpersonally, their temperament wasn't suited to fighting it out in the board. So good ideas would come through, but they wouldn't be the people assertive to push through those ideas. Which I guess takes me on to another point, which is a very wise person, Charlie Munger, who works with Warren Buffett, said, before we start doing the brilliant stuff, we should stop doing the stupid stuff. And I think that's very helpful, because I think, and Tom might want to share the results of the innovation survey, sometimes it's the stupid stuff that blocks innovation. So how about, rather than saying you have to fight your way through in order to get your innovative idea on the table, how about organization, we just stop the stupid stuff and make it easy, and we don't have to fight. So for example, we worked with a drugs company, and they had their pipeline of drugs under development. And we found the people heading up R&D were spending a significant time on the politics within the culture. Well, what a waste of time that is. Give these guys the time and space to do what they're good at, rather than asking them to go through every hoop and loop of political dynamics.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think I see examples in both. If I take innovation in a research sense in universities, the most successful often of operations are often through a highly passionate, committed individual who is just absolutely driven by the question that they're trying to answer. I can think of one example. Currently, I've been working at the University of Dundee, a relatively small university on the east coast of Scotland. It has one of the most successful drug discovery, cancer research, life sciences departments in the UK and in.
I have to interrupt you. Sorry, you said Dundee Cancer Research. A good friend of mine was working there for a long time. So he just quit. He's a triathlon coach, Graham Stewart. So just reminded me of that, because I was listening from him a lot about he was doing the journal, yes. I think, editing. He was in cancer research in Dundee. Yeah.
So you've got a group who will fight, but they will fight for resources. They will fight for access to funds. They're one of the most successfully well-funded units in the country. So on the one hand, you've got that within their disciplinary area. On the other hand, I think the sort of innovation drivers and so on, there was an interesting paper I was reading, a guy called Gary Pistano at Harvard wrote it, the hard truth about innovative cultures. And I thought he made some interesting, very quick, high-level points. He was basically saying, these are not comfortable places to operate. And again, I think from a research scientist, these are often the people who have the highest level of expectations of themselves and each other. So they will really be very demanding of each other. But his 4 or 5 key headline points, which were characterizing the culture of an innovative culture: tolerance for failure, but no tolerance for incompetence. Willingness to experiment, but highly disciplined is the second bullet point. Psychologically safe, but brutally candid. Collaboration, but with individual accountability. Flat, but strong leadership. And these sort of resonated to a degree with me, because they were about sort of conditions for which actually it was really, they were not comfortable. They were edgy places. We often think of a creative, innovative organization as this wonderfully loose, tight, but very sort of understanding of let 1,000 flowers bloom, go and experiment and so on. But these were challenging those assumptions, if you like. Yeah. Andrew, you mentioned the innovations. Sorry, I'll come on to that. Yeah.
And just to sort of follow on Nicola's point about fighting, I guess there's 2 battles to be had. One is the battle for the concept. To what extent is this insight idea going to go to the priority list? And then once it is a priority, the fight for resources to back that idea. And I think sometimes there can be a disconnect between the idea and then the implementation of the idea and the amount of resources that get allocated to it. And that just ends up in a lot of frustration.
Okay.
Just a thought. Sorry.
No, Tom, go ahead. Sorry, this is the first time I'm doing a 3 people interview, so it's a bit.
Just a quick one. Sometimes what I see in an organizational sense, at least in a university context, is because of the constraints of the culture and the internal infighting that's necessary to get resources and so on. I've seen cases where leaders actually recognize that as a challenge, and actually, rather than trying to work within a system, they create it as a very distinct, separate identity on its own to give it the chance to actually, get off the ground and develop and so on. So we've seen some examples of that, I guess, where rather than trying to create a disruptive approach within a university, which can be extraordinarily difficult, we'll set up a separate enterprise where the innovative idea can be developed and taken forward, and maybe over time becomes more connected into the main organization. I guess that's a sort of classic sort of startup model anyway. But
yeah. One of the questions I like to ask when I'm working with organizations is, what do you have to do to get fired? And that's quite telling. So if you get fired by going off on a tangent with some idea that fails, well, your reputation's damaged. So it's better to play safe and go by the rules. So again, we're back to incentive systems.
Yeah.
And do we reward risk, or do we reward business as usual? And the truth for a lot of organizations is we reward business as usual. Why would we expect high levels of creativity and innovation?
Yeah. So, but the way I see it is that if the person is not fighting, for example, my experience with startups is that, yeah, they are much, let's say, maybe safer, but they have a high failure rate, and they don't produce so much. They talk about, but they don't do. So I mean, the medium companies and big companies, they make a big change, and startups sometimes. But if someone in a medium size or a big size company is fighting inside, again, I'm not supporting this. I'm just putting it out there to, I prefer your idea, Andrew, where there is no political. I mean, as someone who spent 20 years, 90% of time with politics, 10% creating, you know, so I define myself as a creative person, but maybe more of a politician. So a fighter. So, but if you don't fight inside and you don't win the inside battles, innovation, actually going to the market, like beating competitors, winning against everybody, it's extremely difficult. And you have to have that kind of like, you have to have that toughness, you know, and it's constant fighting. I mean, you have to have that vision idea keeping you, but it's constant fighting, because I see innovation as actually reaching some critical mass in a product, not just having a good idea. And that in my mind is kind of like, as you asked me a few days ago, I suggested, you know, what is a good story about innovation for me is Renaissance, because it was so bloody. You know, it was extremely bloody, extremely political, and they had to have very tough people pushing it through. You know, maybe someone tried Renaissance 100 years, 200 years before, and they couldn't, you know. So that's why I'm investigating what is the best personality traits, character to be an innovator, and what is the best environment. Is it a quiet, creative person and a supporting environment, or a fighter and very tough environment, or something?
I guess it's, if sometimes we're very fortunate and we have individuals I can think of who are not only highly creative, innovative, but they're highly politically astute in the way in which they operate, and they combine both within the same individual. That's rare. Yeah. More frequently, perhaps the innovator identifies, look, I don't do politics, I'm hopeless at it, I offend people, I really just get their backs up, and they recognize the need for them to work with an individual or a team who actually do a lot of that negotiation and process of relationship building with the funders, with the organization, and so on. But I guess if there's a topic which dominates my one-to-one work, it would be handling political challenges. And it could be either the individual acknowledges that and identifies it, or the person who's the sponsor of the work has identified their limitations and helping them think through how to build relationships constructively with others, often with the remit to enable them to deliver their hugely phenomenal activity.
I do take the point, Tom.
I really like. Yeah. Okay.
I do take the point, Tom, about the individual and the role of an individual and the impact they can have. But if an organization is reliant on personal heroics, it's not sustainable innovation.
That's correct. And therefore that sort of creating an ecosystem, as we often refer to it, becomes crucially important. And I think that's where we're missing an opportunity. And maybe in in the current context. I'm just experimenting with an idea with a university at the moment, and it was provoked by an article on inclusivity as a concept and inclusive cultures. This was encouraging us to find a voice, a vehicle by which every member of your organization can actually have an opportunity to fulfill an innovative idea and take an agenda forward. So this is a particular school in a university. It's got about 70 people who work there, but as part of it, all 70 will have the opportunity to form part of an innovation group to actually take forward a theme which is identifiable as something not yet on the horizon, but something we want to work towards. I'll be interested to see, because it's also about giving voice, particularly to new people who are new to the organization, who one hopes, and I hope will be able to enhance the level of challenge to the prevailing culture in a way which might lead to some new novel ideas developing as well.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I like what you said, is that someone would say, okay, I don't want to deal with politics. I don't want to be a fighter. I just want to innovate. I think this is a great, highly aggressive strategy to win dominance, you know, because that's very smart. I'm going to try that. That's super aggressive in my opinion, because you're saying no to a lot of things. You're being a very passive aggressive, and I like that. I mean, that's what I consider a form of a fight, meaning you're going against the current and trying to find a new way. I like that a lot. But Andrew, just this thing about sustainable organization, you know, how possible is that? You know, you mean that, what do you mean by sustainable? I mean, I guess a lot of people know, but maybe you can define it, you know.
Is the organization capable of, is the organization capable of reinventing itself over time? Mm-hmm. And arguably, there are very few examples. So take Nokia as a good example. I think it started in forestry. It moved into boots, rubber boots. It then got into obviously phones, mobile technology. So over the last 100 years, fantastic job of reinventing itself. Then, I don't know, 10 years ago, any number of engineers within Nokia were working on brilliant smart technology, but the senior team weren't interested. So no resources were allocated to back some of the very innovative things they were doing. So Nokia's market share went from whatever, significant chunk of market share to next to nothing. And then they had to be bailed out by Microsoft. So there are very few examples of sustaining and reinventing the organization decade after decade. And I guess that takes us into the whole creative destruction. Maybe that's just a marketplace. Apple, very successful. Will it continue to be successful? Who knows? Who knows? But if Apple have any sense, they'll be embedding processes and structures and reinforcing a culture that keeps the stream of innovation coming through. I don't have enough insight into Apple to know whether that's the case or not.
I think there's an interesting, very briefly, an interesting model of 7 stages of predictable success in an organization, which I remember and I found quite interesting, from that sort of early stage startup, which I think they refer to as the fun stage. It's just wonderful. I'm having a ball. We're really buzzing. We've got an idea.
It's not.
Yeah, well, okay. But there's something happening here. I can see we've got a chance to make a big difference. Then they talk about the stage you go through, which they refer to as white water, and it's rafting down the rapids, and you're losing control. You're not in full. You cannot meet the demand, or you're getting complaints because you've not quite worked through all the systems and processes and so on. And they often refer to it as, most organizations just then stop doing that and go back to the fun stage, because it's too difficult to transition into a more predictable success stage, which is, come back to Andrew's point, I think is where you have to then embed appropriate systems, procedures, practices, which are going to ensure sustainable, consistent delivery. And that's boring if you're a fun innovator. You just
Yeah.
don't get that. So you need then to have a chief operating officer. You need to, as you will now be the chief executive of an organization which is in free flow, then the dilemma comes when, of course, you overshoot the predictable success point and you get into a bureaucratic control system which has lost all of the early innovation and ideas which are developing. And I think where we see failures, it's often where they've not made that transition and they need to loosen up again in order to enable the process to happen. And again, I think coming back to the local context, I wonder to what extent today we're seeing the potential conditions where actually we have to think very differently to the ways in which we've been operating to date because of the context of COVID.
Yeah.
Michael Rayner's got a very good book called The Strategy Paradox, and he argues that highly successful firms are more similar to failing firms than mediocre firms. And his point is, if you're going to win in the marketplace, you need to commit, seriously commit. But unfortunately, that commitment can either be a failure and you run out of resource and your firm goes bust, or you're lucky and that commitment translates into a good market share and profitability. His argument is that mediocre firms sort of hang around, they persevere based on medium levels of commitment. So they persist, but they don't really add much value in the marketplace. So yeah, another paradox of innovation, really. If you don't commit, you'll be mediocre. If you do commit, there's a high risk of failure.
Yeah. Well, just to put into this, so we are talking about individual character. You know, what kind of a person is to be is a good innovator. Then environment inside the organization. And I also wanted to ask you, now that you mentioned, and I saw your tweets on books, on business books, that, you know, I'm both, I'm a little bit skeptical of business books as well. How much does because they come from a specific culture. You know, I work mostly with Italian and some German companies, and Italians, especially Northeast in Veneto, they have a particular culture about business. And actually their products are all over the world. They're just, you know, seen a little bit differently than, you know, maybe American companies or some other. So I see this difference in culture. So how, you know, this thing that you said, for example, about companies that have to commit or not, my experience with Italian companies is that they're going to be very product oriented. They're going to do a lot of products. They're going to try to do many different products. Well, because they have a small market, you know, Italy is fragmented, Europe is fragmented, and they have to target many different markets with a product. While in America it's so huge, you know, it's like 350, 20 million, you know, more or less one TV, one media system, one language, not fragmented. So they think completely differently. So transferring these ideas from a country that's, in my view, I mean, I love America, but it's more similar to China to me than it is to Europe, you know, because it's so big and standardized, you know. And in Europe it's so fragmented, you know, Germany, Italy are, you know, you have the small countries, Switzerland, you know, Belgium, etc. So which culture, how does that, you know, individual, organization, culture of a country or nation or something, how does that all relate? You know, how does it all work in terms of innovation?
You want to talk a little bit about the work you did, Tom, on global leaders and engagement?
Yes, a project that Andrew and I worked on was trying to capture and characterize what's associated with being effective as a leader, working across cultures and working in multiple cultures, and trying to distill what some of those characteristics might be. And it was a combination of a sort of mindset which was quite adaptable and flexible to, rather than a very fixed, very black and white, but much more a nuanced shades of gray approach to understanding different worlds and contexts, to adaptability. I think we called it tactical versatility, a set of capabilities to co-create an agenda to work through what would be common interests as well as particular themes which you were interested in, but see this as and also an experience of life which was very broad-based. So when I've used this tool, which Andrew helped develop, was actually, particularly with people who work in globally connected ways, an amazing, I haven't written it up, Andrew, but amazing stats on the number who have worked overseas, who've worked in different cultures, and that's what's drawn them into this fascinating role that they now have. So I guess we all have the privilege of working with cultures across many different jurisdictions. For people who've had that experience, I lived in Jamaica in an early part of my life, and that was very influential in shaping my understanding of different cultures. But so many others that I've met along the way have had similar sort of quite dramatic life experiences which have shaped their understanding and their capacity, I hope, to be more aware of how to work across cultural boundaries. So that's more at the individual level. Do you want to pick up, Andrew, on more an organizational or national cultural level?
Yeah, it's not something I'm too well informed about, actually. Nicola's probably looked at innovation levels across different countries and cultures. But there is one point, and I've forgotten what it is. Oh yeah, coming back to your point, Nicola, about business books, particularly business books on innovation, I can't help feeling that some of the messages are overgeneralized from high-profile American companies. Google does this, Google's successful, therefore we should do this. Facebook do this, or Amazon do this, they're successful, we should do it. Well, I'm not sure some of those dynamics do generalize across different cultures. As I say, I don't know enough about cultural variation and innovation, but I think some of our thinking is a bit skewed by, the skew in business literature around innovation. I'm sure over the planet, there's any number of innovative experiments going on that the big business gurus are completely unaware of.
Yeah. I think some of the work of the Dutch have done probably more research in this area, I think, than I've seen elsewhere. And a guy called Hofstede many years ago was sort of trying to distill capture the characteristics of different national cultures. And one of the dimensions which links to what you're saying, Andrew, was the collectivism culture versus an individual culture. And in countries where one can imagine the potential for highlighting cultures which are very significantly about the individual, and I think the US classically would score highly in that, and therefore you get this sort of focus on individual cases and so on, to more collaborative cultures where actually the innovation comes through joint collective activities as well. And I wonder if we're actually at a moment where we need to be thinking about those collaborative approaches to innovation and development of concepts and ideas. You take the current context for vaccine development across the globe, I guess, is an interesting...
Yeah, that's a good example.
Example of the moment, isn't it? What if we were, and I suspect we're not as good at this as we should be, actually, rather than seeking individual countries to be the first, whether it's Oxford or whether it's somewhere else, but actually this is a global pandemic. We need a global response. And where we've seen, I think, situations where countries have really lifted themselves to think collectively about the challenge, then I think we're beginning to see real system level leadership and innovation potentially being possible.
Because we're brought up with a story of the individual maverick inventor. So Thomas Edison, the story goes, it's a bit of a myth, the story goes, he persevered on any number of materials as he was exploring products within electricity. In fact, his innovation was to create an innovation factory. It was not the effort of a lone individual. He had a massive team around him, but he was very good at working with that team. But we have this sense of, oh, who do we look for inspiration for innovation? Thomas Edison. Well, no. If those days were ever true, they're well and truly numbered now. Innovation has to be and will increasingly be a collaborative exercise.
One example, just building on that, which I was privileged to know the person who was an author of, was a piece of work done in Australia. And it was to bring together the top 100 scientists involved in COVID research across all of the big research-intensive universities in Australia. And they, over a 3-week period, I could not imagine how they managed to achieve this, they created a contribution to the nation, a route map to dealing with the COVID context. And they did it by a collective effort to bring them together and some really smart software development, which was taking place at the University of Melbourne. So the report is based at the group of 8 universities in Australia and the University of Melbourne, but it was also not driven by self-interest. It was very much about, this is the contribution that we as scientists can offer you, government. We're not asking for money, we're not asking for resources. We merely want to demonstrate what we can offer. And it was very well regarded. It's a piece of work which, literally, as I say, in a 3-week period, they managed to convene, coalesce, use some swarm software, which I'm not familiar with, but a artificial intelligence process specialist group at Melbourne were developing, and create this. And it just made me wonder if we were doing similar approaches, what that would look like as an approach to innovation.
Of course, in the UK, Tom, we were reliant on Dominic Cummings and Matt Hancock.
What a collaborative duo that is.
Yeah, and what a success! What success emerged from that strategy.
Indeed, indeed.
Andrew, you saw that interview.
Nicola.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I don't know if you saw that interview with Richard Barbrook, who is a Labour advisor. He's one of the guys. So I had 1.5 hours of political discussion with him, and he's a friend, so he's very upset with the current political status in UK. Anyway, the last question, because we have another, I think, 10 minutes. How do you think innovation will be created, let's say 100 years from now? How will it be done? Because I see it's less and less fighting. It's more and more collaboration technology. That's the message I'm getting, and also my experience. It's more peaceful, it's more rational, it's less fighting. The dialectic process and the conflict process is externalized. Maybe for clients are choosing the product or experience, it's not anymore that someone needs to fight so much. So how do you see that in, let's say, 100 or 200 years? Let's say 2200, let's say. How do you think innovation is going to be created by then?
I'll let you answer that one, Tom, while I get a glass of water.
Yeah.
I was reading an article that had a similar question asked of a vice chancellor. How do you see universities? And it was by 2050. And he pondered and thought, I'm willing to make a prediction. I think universities of the future will be pretty similar to universities of today.
Yeah.
Was that it? Yes. And it was a helpful provocation, because I think it will be a combination, of course, of things of which the individual and the individual genius and the individual spark of an idea will be and continue to be necessary. However, the technological environment within which we'll be operating will allow us to perhaps do the prototyping and the fast review of options and possibilities. If we take the example of oncology and treatment for cancers today, using artificial intelligence systems, which are enabling a physician assistant to advise a consultant on treatment options and probabilities of outcomes and so on, because the artificial intelligence system is able to look at all of the resources much more widely. So I think we'll see that sort of technology being an adjunct to the innovators and the innovation ecosystem. But I think also the connectivity between organizations and bodies will just grow, despite the sort of, the anti-globalization movement, if you like, that we're seeing to some extent at the moment. Actually, this is an unstoppable train. And so the technological interconnectedness of ideas and so on will continue to accelerate. And I think that will be hopefully a way in which we'll see much more radical challenges to global issues. That's my hope.
Can I just add one thing that I'm focusing on this question is that over time, a bigger number of people is participating in changing, innovating, innovation, meaning creating change in society. Like maybe 1,000 years ago, there was like 1%, now it's 20%, 10%. There is still enormous amount of, just a story, we don't know if there is an Einstein currently in a township Einstein in South African township, we don't know. So the point is that there is enormous amount of intellectual capacity being blocked somewhere, only few of us, how many of us can discuss these kind of things? And so that's why I'm asking 180 years in the future, like how much it changed in the last 180 years, which is, I'm very bad with math. How much is 2020 minus 180? That's 1840, so mid 19th century or something. And then, how much is going to be in the 22nd century? How much is, no, it's 23rd century, sorry, my math. So I'm assuming, I'm also asking when more people are participating, as you said, Andrew, that they're more open, there is less political, and there is much more people participating in innovation, So that's something that I'm interested in. How do you think that's going to happen? And if it's going to happen, if it's going to go in that direction?
Like Tom, I'm optimistic about the future, not least because of the absolute ingenuity of human beings and their ability to improvise and adapt to any number of challenges. But I guess making long-range predictions depends on how we anticipate various political and social scenarios. And right now, it's tempting to be very short-term and think what's going on in the States, what's going on in Europe, Brexit, UK, what a mess. We'll adapt and survive and get through it. So there'll be a kind of tension, I think, between political classes and structures and what potentially we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. I'm not big on conspiracy theories at all, but I think unless we understand the kind of political dynamics of who wins and who loses in innovation and the amount of money that's owned by a relatively small number of people on planet Earth, I think that issue will have to be resolved. We can't keep widening the inequity between the top few and the mass of the public.
If I could put the plug in for the necessity for engagement in higher education as being one of the vehicles which will enable us to come through this and so on. So I think it's not up to universities to make that case. They can do so. It needs the public in general to be seeing the value of an educated population in innovation, in healthcare, in ways of responding to social unrest, and so on and so forth. And that's the challenge for Africa. If you take it back to the township in South Africa, of the capacity for the demand for higher education in Africa is exploding because of the young population that's coming through, and the need for investment to enable that intellectual capital to be really used to the benefit of society. If not, it will sadly create all sorts of social challenges for individuals collectively. And I think that case, it needs to be constantly made. But I'm where I see examples in, I'm working with a team in in Tanzania, which is the Southern Africa Consortium on Infectious Disease Surveillance. So the team who are actually looking at COVID across that part of the world, and some of the amazing science which they are doing and the ways in which they're operating. But they're doing it in a collaborative venture. It's a community of scientists across 5 nations who are coming together collectively. So I think on specific issues, there's real progress. I think on a mass scale of investment in education, you know, there's a major gap to be filled. That's for sure.
Okay. Oh, that's cool.
How are you progressing your own platform, Nicola? Is that up and running?
It was supposed to launch on Monday, so obviously it's not. So there is always like the last minute debugging and the things that I don't like. And I think I'm very happy with the feeling, you know, with the concept. You know, that's most important, because the concept had to be healthy for the open innovation platform. And the idea for me is, I'm 100% certain that we are going in a good direction, meaning that, but we want to make open innovation into a sort of social media, meaning that open innovation, the way it's so far, I don't consider it open. You know, it's lots of forms, companies produce very little. I've been counting what most platforms do. They do like in a couple of years only, you know, maybe 100 challenges that are all ultra specific, and they take a lot of time to prepare, very bureaucratic. So I just want to make it as easy as using Instagram, you know, for anybody to suggest a good idea. And I think conceptually we're good. Interface is okay. I'm very stuck. I'm an interface designer originally, so I want to make it absolutely the best. So maybe too much, but I think it's let's say going well. Technology is fine. I mean, it's not. I used to do AI before, so this is not as complex. But I think in a week or two, I don't know. I'm hoping, so Friday is not going to happen. I set a deadline Wednesday after months and months of development. So we are like within days, you know, for the first version, and which is closed invitation only. And then it's going to be constant iterations every 2 weeks and to figure out in which direction. So it's very exciting in a sense that we are aiming for a really like a big thing, and then, you know, have to kind of deal with micro problems every day with all the little details, but still reach that huge goal, you know. Wow. We are applying for a big grant now that we got a smaller one, and then we are using that, but we have to prepare for more funding. So a bigger one on European Union level, which is private investment. So I have to do that in a month. So that's really a big step. So I'll definitely show you guys what we have.
Yeah.
And, you know,
please do.
Because everything that we're discussing, the questions that I'm asking are all extremely related to, you know, what kind of an individual, what kind of organization, what kind of culture are related to innovation, and how can that be increased? Because my idea is to increase it as much as possible. You know, just like, you know, if you wanted to do photography before Instagram and smartphones, I had to buy an Nikon, you know, the expensive camera, and then focus, and it was very difficult. And now my kids can do photos. My son at age 5, 4 was doing photos and posting them. And I think that's why I'm asking about unlocking capacity, you know, and because I want to unlock that capacity in innovation, you know, how to make products and experiences better. So thank you for asking. Yeah, I will definitely send you when we have something, and when it's, you know, and definitely for your feedback as well, you know. Again, if the interface is not your style, but the concept for me is very important, because interface is even easy to change, but conceptually, I want it to be frictionless, easy, less bureaucratic. Yeah. So it can be really accelerated, you know, and then 10,000 ideas, one goes through. But there is another thing I wanted to talk about: happiness, innovating. Even by writing, I want people to be happy, even if he doesn't realize. Anyway, time passed. Thank you very much, Andrew and Tom. So
thanks for setting it up, Nicola.
So I'm gonna stop the meeting and then end the meeting, and then I'm gonna email you after immediately. So,
okay.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Good to speak.
Really nice to meet you.
Ciao.
Okay, you take care.
Ciao. Bye.